So we're going to jump into shift tactic 2. Now what is tactic 2? Not a trick question as well.
Remargin your business.
Remargin your business, right? So let's pull out a couple quotes right away for you. So flip to page 29. We're going to start doing some rapid fire out of shift.
Do you want these handed out?
Not yet, we will.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so on page 29, Gary says this: my experience has taught me that people most responsive to change are the ones most likely to survive and what? Thrive. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
We all saw people last time the market changed that were not quick to respond, and some of them are no longer our peers. Okay? Then he says below that, when change affects your plan, what do?
Change your plan.
Plan effective change. When change affects your plan, plan effective change. Some people get so caught up and lost in the victimhood of the market change, I don't know what to do, they don't take immediate action and change their plan. Okay? That's what we want to prevent. And then on page 31, because we're talking about remargining your business, profitability. We're having a business owner conversation. I'm not talking to realtors, I'm talking to business owners today, okay? So we're going to use lingo that you're going to hear in other businesses, and there's a reason for that. So the first thing, we have to decide whether profit's a good or a bad thing. Now, making money is a good thing, but profit specifically, look what he says on page 31. The fact is that for all of its positive indicators, profit can also give a false reading. We allow an increase in our business profits to convince us that what?
Doing okay.
What we're doing is working well. Really well. Thus, we mistakenly justify our increased expenses as what? Cost of doing business. How many of you have heard that before or said it? Don't raise your hands. And allowing our rising revenue and present profit to cover up any mistakes or inefficiencies, okay? So the whole point of this shift conversation, as we continue to go through this every meeting, is to prepare you. Now what happens, I had this conversation multiple times yesterday, what happens if the shift doesn't hit us as hard here as it does other markets? What's the worst thing that can happen? You're more profitable and you're more efficient, right? So there is no downside to working through this material because either way you'll be more prepared than your competition. And in a down market like we looked at last meeting, that's when you really can take market share. Okay? That's when it really means more than it does today. So no matter what the market is, you must always, this is on page 33, you must always follow the philosophy of lead with what? Revenue, not with expenses, right? And in this industry, for a long time, we've been doing a disservice to our peers by saying that we lead with what? Most agents lead with expenses. And then they take whatever's left over as profit. Right? That's conventional wisdom in our business, unfortunately. What we're saying here, what Gary's saying is we need to turn that on its head. Right? We need to lead with revenue, not with expenses. So expenses are only put in the budget when they're justifiable and when there's money to be able to spend on them. Okay? The whole point of this economic model that we're going to go through from MRE as well is to protect your net income. Okay? Because we all know a lot of agents that do a ton of volume and make $0 at the end of the year because they spend it all. Right? You know a couple people like that? That's a hobby. I don't want any of you in this business to be a hobby, okay? So here's what he says on 33, and then we'll dive into it. Most agents tend to think that they're as good as their last best year instead of the average over their careers. Now think about that. Most agents tend to think they're as good as their last best year instead of the average over their career. They tend to think the trend of their last couple of good years will continue, and they underestimate the market's contribution to their success. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, that happens all the time. It's happening now. Unfortunately, even here at KW it's happening, and this is why we want to kind of sound the trumpet and make a wake-up call that you're not as good as your last best year. You have to look at the average of all of your years, right? And so what does that do to your average number? Up or down? Down, okay? So it's about getting real with where we're actually at, not letting success intoxicate us into thinking we're better than we actually are, okay? Because those are the people that really get caught off guard. So here's what we're going to talk about today, main ideas. Perspective on expense management. We're going to talk about measuring the market, sizing your business, cutting the fat, everyone's favorite part, making the most of what you have. And we're going to get to, if you know Gary, he likes to have bottom line stuff, so we're going to get to his bottom line and then an action plan for you guys to move forward. I want you guys to write this down, shiftproof.com. Shiftproof.com. So what we're doing with that website is we're compiling the videos from these trainings, we're compiling the student workbooks that I'm not printing for you here because they're 30 and 40 pages. We're putting those there, we're putting the PowerPoints there, because we want you guys to have access to this material to be able to really use and go over again and work with your teams on and so on and so forth. So check that out every Wednesday after we're done. Towards the end of the day, we'll have that current training up on that site, and it'll be all the tactics as we go through. Okay, so it should be a really good resource. So we're going to start defining this. What is margin? Who can give me an idea of what the heck I'm talking about when I say margin? What's that?
Big butter.
Oh, Chris. Big butter. Not margarine, right? Margin. What's margin?
Difference between expenses
Cost and sales.
It was Stephen. Difference between
Cost and sales.
cost and sales, right? Here's the actual definition. Now, let's hold off on that. I'll get to that in a second. This is what I want you to take away from this. The difference that exists between net sales. So what do you pay your bills with, gross or net? Net. We can have a number of people making a ton of gross, and those are the same agents I'm talking about that have very little profit at the end of the year because they don't follow a budget, they don't hold their money accountable, and those are the ones that get pinched the hardest when the market changes. Okay? So the difference between your net sales and the cost of doing business, meaning your expenses, and from which expenses are usually net and or profit derived. So these are the metrics we're going to look at, and we're going to actually have a little worksheet to give you guys to be looking through this. So look at page 29. This is a key to today. Gary says thriving is about lead generation, but surviving is about what? Expense management. Let's marinate on that one for a second. Thriving is about lead generation. It takes leads to make money. Would we all agree with that? Yes? No? Yes. Okay. That's about lead generation. That's where we thrive. Surviving is about what? Expense management. Because if your expenses are out of whack, at some point you can't generate enough leads to pay the bills. Does that make sense? So that's the importance of today. That's why all the shift tactics are really good. All of them are really important. And if your expenses are out of control, nothing else you do is going to matter because this will kill you every time. That's why I said this is one of the most important ones, and I genuinely meant it. Okay? So to generate revenue, this is on page 30 of Shift. To generate revenue, you generate leads. To make a profit, you manage expenses. Big difference there. Okay? It's not about how many sales you do or how much closed volume you do. While we celebrate that and I'm excited for you, what I care most about is what do you net? Because that's what keeps you in the business, pays your bills, funds your life. Okay, that's the important part. So, generally speaking, there's a lot of people in here who used to run other companies. Generally speaking, what are the two ways, there are only two, to increase profitability of any business, regardless of industry? Increase sales, cut expenses. Increase revenue and cut expenses. Okay, pretty simple stuff, right? Makes sense? Yet, some agents think that they can simply cut their way or save their way to prosperity. Right? It has to be a twofold approach. You have to hit it from both sides. You can only cut so far before you start getting into core services that will completely take your feet out from underneath you. So as we're cutting expenses, we have to also be looking at how can we generate more or additional revenue, because then that's where our margin comes into play. Are we all good so far? Does this make sense? Okay? So, here's what he says, protecting your margin, and we're going to actually walk through you guys figuring out your own. When the market shifts, your margin becomes what? Your biggest issue. How many people have felt the reality of that statement? 4 people. Excellent. Okay, so when the market shifts, your margin is absolutely your biggest issue. Because do your bills stop when the market shifts? Your creditors don't care what the real estate market's doing. Has anyone tried using that excuse? Because I bet you get a laugh. They don't care. Right? So your job as a business owner is to make sure that regardless of what the market is, your margin stays intact. Whether you're scaling up or scaling down based on market conditions, we want to make sure your margin is intact because that's where your revenue and your profit comes from. Okay? So, protecting your margin is saving your business. It's time to cut back on expenses. And Gary says this, and he's famous for saying this, unless it's nailed down, it goes. Right? Nothing is sacred. Nothing is sacred when a shift occurs and we start really evaluating with a fine-tooth comb each expense, nothing can be sacred. Okay, we have to turn over every rock. So what he talks about here is live to fight another day. So we talked about thriving versus surviving. What was the difference? This is a test. What was the difference? Lead generation is how you thrive. Expense management is how you survive. So part of going through a shifted market is plain and simple survival, right? It's not really complicated business. It's just straight up, how do I position my business to weather this storm? Because what do we know about market shifts? They're cyclical. They're going to come and go, right? So we just have to wait it out, and another good market will be right behind. There's opportunity throughout the entire process. Okay, so here's what he's talking about, and this is where you guys, hopefully, my hope for all of you is that you guys gain a competitive advantage by taking these courses and going through this material, because it makes you more nimble. How many people ever learned in school about the Revolutionary War? Okay, so at that time, is it all right if we get a little practical here? Okay, at that time, which was the bigger army? British Army. They were massive, right? They controlled the world. They owned almost all of the world, right? They were the power. They had more men. Most of those men were career soldiers, meaning they'd been through extensive training. They were better funded. They had more equipment. If you were looking at that on paper and had no tie to any of it, who would you say should have won that war? British, all day long. Why didn't they? Potentially. How many people have heard of guerrilla warfare?
Yeah.
We're talking strategy. The problem with the British was that they were fighting wars the same way they had been for years and years and years, where we all get in a line and stand up and see who gets shot first. And then it's our turn to shoot back and do the same thing to you. That was the way that we fought wars, right? Now you got to think about the American army, right? Who was that comprised of? Trained soldiers?
Farmers.
Majority of them were tradesmen, farmers, laborers, not skilled fighting people. They didn't have a ton of experience. They hadn't gone through the academies, right? Yet they were still able to win. What's that?
They knew how to shoot a turkey.
They knew how to shoot a turkey. But what allowed a smaller, less funded, less trained group of people defeat the largest army in the world at the time? Strategy. That's what we're talking about here. All of this is simply strategy for you guys to use in your business, because if you're more nimble and more agile and easier to respond to a shift when you see it, and you see it sooner than your competition, who's going to last longer? You are. Does this make sense? Very, very practically. You can apply these principles anywhere, but that's how we got here. So here's the question. Who's going to be affected? Everybody, right? So at first, everyone will experience some pain of a shift. Now, to what extent? That's the great debate, and that's the big question, and I don't know. Right? None of us do. Anybody that tells you they know when or what is a complete liar, right? We don't know. What we do know is that it does happen at some point. We're over 8 years through this process. Historically speaking, it should have happened about a year ago. So we're on borrowed time. Now, that's great, and we're making the most of it, and I'm encouraging all of you to continue doing that while taking time to work in your business and then on your business, right? Because right now, when you're buying and selling and you're working with clients and you're representing people, you're doing presentations, are you working in the business or on it? In. If you stopped working in the business in your current situation, would the business continue? Likely not. The difference between an agent and a business owner is a business owner carves out time to work on their business, and that's what we're talking about here. Okay? Really evaluating all components. So, can you thrive in a down market? What's the answer?
Yes.
No and yes. Right? So at first, everybody's impacted. Everyone will feel it. Everyone is going to feel a little pain and discomfort because it's not going to be the known and it's not going to be what we had before. The people who are going to thrive are the ones who are more agile, more responsive, and take quicker action, because then they're going to be positioned to gobble up more of the market share. Does that make sense? We saw, those of you that were in this last time, I can give you names of people, examples, we watched this happen. And it's unfortunate because a lot of them aren't in the business anymore. Okay? And I don't want any of that to be you guys. So this next one, that's kind of what we were talking about. Phenomenal opportunities exist, but you need to be fighting fit if you want to take advantage of them. What do we mean by that?
In good shape.
In good shape, right? We have a number of agents here, I'm not going to single you out, but a number of agents here who have done the Ironman race. Do you just show up to that race, the day of the race, and say, boy, I hope it goes well. Hope I don't kick my guts out, here we go. How long is the average training for something like Ironman? You're over a year typically for a lot of people.
Depends if you're breaking in.
That's correct. I wasn't going to name anybody. But you get my point, right? So we have to, I want to get you guys to all be in the camp of the fighting fit, because then it doesn't matter when it happens, you're prepared for it, right? And we're going to continue to do our job on our side to watch these indicators we're going to talk about, to give you as much notice as we can when we see something coming. And I can't work on your business for you, only you can, it's your business, okay? So you have to take some of these steps on your own. So we're going to look at 4 simple steps that we're really going to spend the rest of our time on. So the first one is measure your market. And then we're going to talk about sizing your business, cutting the fat, and making the most of what you have. So let's talk about measuring the market. Here's what we're not really talking about. We're not really talking about how big is your market area. We're not really talking about how many sales are you putting in escrow. What are we talking about likely? What's Gary talking about with measure your market? What's that?
Compare the baseline or previous.
It's talking about your reach within that market. Okay? So the market as a whole is going to go up and down. There's going to be more sales, there's going to be less sales. What he's talking about here, what we're going to expand on here is what is your reach, what's your penetration in that market as far as market share goes, number of sales within the context of the overall market. That's the important part. Because how many people were in business 8 years ago? There were tremendously less sales 8 years ago than there were already this year. And a number of you still made incredible money 8 years ago in this business. It's not, your success has nothing to do with how many total sales there are in the MLS. It's all about your reach within those sales. How many of those sales do you represent? What percentage of those sales do you represent? That's what he's talking about measuring here, okay? And then he's talking about there's also 6 things that we can monitor, okay? 6 indicators that if we carefully look at these things, they're going to give us some idea of what's coming or timing of what may be coming. So the first one is what?
More inventory.
Duh. That's an easy one. Okay, next one. Right? Not surprising any of you. That's what would be right there too. Number 3. Fewer pending. So 1 through 3, what would be the one tool that you can scan in 30 seconds and know all of this data? TMO report. Okay, so I'm going to keep beating this into your heads. The TMO report is going to be your biggest friend here to be able to watch the timing of what's coming. Because we're going to see it a few months out. Okay? Number 4, smaller board. He has that on here. I'm going to respectfully disagree because to me that's a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. People generally don't get out of the market until after the shift has already happened and they start feeling the pain. Right? So it still can be something we look for because that creates opportunity now because there's fewer people competing with us. Yet at the same time, it's not something I'm going to tell you to be looking for on the front end of something. Number 5, lower production and or volume. Okay, so how many of you right now, you don't have to raise your hand, it's a rhetorical question, but think through your own business. Today, and this year to date, versus even the last couple of years, how many of you are doing about the same number of units, but you're making more money? Why is that possible? Because the average price is higher than it was, it means you do more volume, right? So the more money in the same amount of work, or the same number of transactions. So, lower production is the duh one, but volume may be one that we want to watch, because if you start seeing that dip a little bit, it may mean you have to figure out ways to generate more leads to do the same amount of business, the same income, okay? And then number 6, overall, and this is why I asked that question this morning, fewer leads, right? Now one day, one weekend, especially a Labor Day or a Memorial Day weekend, is not enough in and of itself to say that the market is shifting. That's not what I'm saying. It's just simply an example of how aware of those types of things are you, right? How in the moment are you being to really compare how is this week or this weekend, or how is my month as far as leads generated compared to the last 2 weeks, okay? Makes a really, really, really big difference as far as getting you there faster. It's no different. We're a real estate agent team just like you are, okay? So the whole point is, are you looking at your numbers regularly to know what's coming? calculate how many closings you have and your projected income from those closings. Now, it doesn't mean once you calculate that, you go, that's awesome, and I'm going to go spend it. It's a tool for knowing what revenue should be coming in to your business over the next 30 to 60 days. So, can we hand those or pass those worksheets out, please? What I'm giving you, it's only 3 or 4 pages from the student guide. So the student guide for this session is like 30-something pages long. It's going to be on that website for you to download because there's a lot of other good exercises. What I'm passing out to you here are simply a couple key exercises you can use. We're not going to take a ton of time in the session today, but I do want you to be familiar with how they work, what the general idea is, because this really will be beneficial to you guys if you take a few minutes to do it sometime this week for your business, okay? So as you're getting those handed out, we're going to keep moving. So there's 3 things that these worksheets on this first page is going to show you really what you should be looking at. So the first question to ask is how many closings are in the pipeline for the next 2 months? That's going to be different for all of you. You're going to have to look up your own numbers, but this is where you would plug that in. What's your projected income from your closed transactions, and what will be your average monthly income based on your 60-day projection? Okay? Simple enough. That's on page 6 from that guideline. Okay? So keep that out. We're going to keep going through different pieces, and I'll tie this all together and show you why this is relevant. So the next section we're going to talk about is sizing your business, right? How many people have a business that's a different size today than it was 4 years ago? Right? So our business grows or it scales in accordance to what the market's doing to some level, right? We're going to staff up and we're going to ramp up tools, people, all kinds of different leverage when the market's hot. And then when the market slows down, we may do what? We may start cutting back down, right? Because our expenses have to be less than our income or revenue, right? It has to be less, or else you're doing it for free. It's a hobby. And I can think of a lot of other things you'd rather be doing with your time, okay? So we're going to make sure that we're sizing our business, but what's the sentence underneath? This is the key that Gary talked about at Family Reunion this year. To the coming market. Now, the biggest challenge most agents have here with scaling a business or sizing their business is, what are they sizing it to? They're sizing it to their current market, their current pressure they're feeling, the current need. Right? And I get that because it's human nature. I'm feeling pressure, I have a lot of leads, I can't work them all, I need more people, I need better systems, which none of that is bad, and some of it can be if not kept in control. Okay? What he's talking about, what Gary really was talking about with the top 100 even last month in Austin, Texas, is you size your business to the market that's coming, not the market that you're in. You guys get the difference there? Now, I'm not saying if you have a team of 14 people, you need to cut to 2. That's not what I'm saying. Don't fire anybody because of what I just said. What I'm telling you, though, is as you're looking long-term and you're making plans and you're coming up with your organizational chart and you're working on your strategy, it should be based on, first, this market, but more importantly, the market we're going to transition into next. Whether that's transitioning into a slower market, more balanced market, or whether it's transitioning into a more fast-paced and frenzied market. Does that make sense to everybody? So the size of your business, you have to take into account where we're headed, what's coming, right? Not where we sit today. So these are Gary's notes. So if you heard him talk, you'll kind of chuckle because it's pretty black and white. It is time to take a cold, hard look at your financial situation. Here's what he says right here. Look at 2 broad categories. This is where some of you are going to get really uncomfortable. Your personal expenses as well as your business expenses. Right? Now, I'm not going to make you do any of this in front of everybody, but this is really important to take into consideration because do your personal finances affect your business? If anyone's ever been tight on personal finances and it's not affected your business, you should write a book because there'll be a lot of people buying it. Right? One always impacts the other, and vice versa. If your business is doing really well, then that affects your personal because our expenses typically rise to the level of our income, right? That's human nature. So the whole point of this is we have to be cognizant of that and we have to really watch that and look for opportunities to cull that, okay? So the next thing, and I'm not suggesting again that you do any of this right now, but I want to get you thinking about this because when a shift occurs, what's the top one say here? Right? I love the fact that a number of you are making a ton of money. And I love the fact that almost all of you are doing more this year than you did last year. That's fantastic. And in conversation with a couple of you yesterday, I was really happy to hear that you're going to put off some things you were going to do because you want to have a war chest built up in preparation. That's prudent. Okay? I'm not saying don't have fun. I'm not saying don't go on vacations. What I am saying is you need to, again, not just look at today's market, but where are we going to be in a year or 2 years, right? And we need to prepare for that.